Hi, everyone. Welcome to Museum on Tap Happy Hour presented by the Cincinnati Museum Center. I'm Jessica Urban, and today I'm hanging out with Mark Casey, historian, West End resident, and Cincinnati Heritage Programs docent. Welcome to Happy Hour, Mark.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's good to see you.
You too. So I know you have a really interesting story for us today, but before we dive in, why don't you share a little bit about yourself for our friends watching at home?
Well, yeah. My name is Marq Casey. My real name is Marquavius, but mostly everybody calls me Mark. My mama gave me that nickname to make it easier for people and not force them to say Marquavius. Some people can say it, without a problem, but some people take time. I answer to Mark, Marcus, because people do whatever they want to do with Mark. I got Marcus, Marquise. Some people spell it with a Q. I mean C or a K. I spell it with a Q. But yeah, I'm Marq Casey. I live in the West End. I'm a history major in college right now, and I volunteer with the Museum Center. I love it.
That's great. I know that you're a busy man, so I appreciate you taking time to talk to me today. And I also appreciate the fact that between work and family, you've made time to volunteer as a Cincinnati Heritage Programs docent. So what that tells me is you must really have a passion for Cincinnati and for history.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
And I know that's where your story is taking us today. So without further ado, go ahead.
Oh, yay. So So when I was asked to share a story, I really just went with what I've been already thinking about these past couple months. Ever since the COVID-19 pandemic happened, it's just I think it's given everybody a lot of time to think about certain things that are of interest to them. And with me, I've been thinking about school. So my son is 10 years old. He goes to a Cincinnati public school here in the West End. And because of the pandemic, obviously the schools are shut down, which I'm completely in full agreement with. But it caused me and probably 1,000 other parents in the city to get used to learning how to, temporarily homeschool. And I'm not complaining. It has been rough, the up and downs, dealing with attitudes and how to set like a schedule that's consistent and works. Yeah. And trying to be consistent myself. So really being an example to our kids, which were not very good ones. But no. So it put me in the rhythm of that, and eventually we got in a good rhythm, and it was good. But it caused me to think, so now I'm dealing with like his curriculum, or at least the temporary curriculum that they gave us.
Yeah.
More closely. I'm used to him coming home with homework assignments, and that give me some idea of what he's being taught. But these last 2 months has really just put me I was like, wow, so this is what you're learning, this is what they're teaching, and it started to make me think more so from a ethnic point of view. So I'm an African American. CPS school system is predominantly African American, and so I'm not only thinking as just a parent, I'm trying to think as an African American parent, and I was just wondering, knowing the history that I know, I'm learning more and more, but I have a knowledge of I started thinking about just my son's educational needs that were not being met. And I started thinking, what would it take for me to meet those needs? And so just a education that's more fruitful and beneficial for Black children.
Sure.
And I started thinking, what if so his school system is shut down? What if there was a Black educational school system that was public, that existed for Cincinnati's Black population, and that was shut down too, along with these other school systems?
Yeah.
And the reason why I thought of that is because I know that there used to be a public school system here for Cincinnati's Black population, and it was called the Colored Public School System of Cincinnati. And so that only came from just having time to think. I'm dealing with the curriculum, and I'm thinking, I don't know if that's like, I'm just like, I don't know if I would have taught you that myself. But so yeah, I was just started thinking more so from a Black perspective of what more education I could bring to them. So that's how it started, honestly. It just made me start thinking about Cincinnati's former colored public school system. Uh, so yeah, that story, it kind of, it's an old one. It really is. It is not. I don't think a lot of Cincinnati realize that African Americans in particular, we have been in this city since the beginning. Like, we have historical records of African Americans being here as early as the 1790s. And so in terms of going back that far, we have always had a need for education. There's been a kind of evolution to that, though. In 1825, Ohio lawmakers, they banned African Americans from being in the public color school system. It was repealed, and I think in 1829. But it was reappealed to kick us out of what was called the common public school systems then. And then in 1838, they went even further and said that even if African American, they basically that if there were a school system that were to pop up for colored people in this city, that no tax dollars paid by Black people can go towards it. So it was kind of a preventative measure made by white Ohio lawmakers to keep African Americans from being able to give their own money to educate their own children. So that was the evolution. And the way that the colored public school system came into existence was that African Americans from this city petitioned the Ohio state lawmakers for their own public school system, and it was granted to them in 1849.
Oh, wow.
1849. So that kicked it off. But it wasn't easy. When it got back to Cincinnati, the city council didn't provide money for this public school system for color citizens. So city leaders, Black city leaders like John Gaines, he had to sue the city. It took a couple years and went all the way up to the Ohio Supreme Court, which they eventually decided in the Cincinnati's Black population's favor. And the city of Cincinnati then had to release Black tax dollars so that they can be able to run their own school system. Some of the reasons why the city council were rejecting initially was because they felt like, since African Americans couldn't vote at that time, that the school board that was elected by Black people was it was irrelevant, illegitimate. They shouldn't have been able to do it. But the Ohio Supreme Court obviously decided against that. And they also really wanted those Black tax dollars back in the common public school system, which is today Cincinnati public school system is what we call it now. So yeah, it was definitely some resistance, but even still, like, the school system was started 1849. Teachers were recruited. The first teacher recruited, we have record of, his name was Peter Clark, a very influential African American from this city, was born here, educated here. And he went on to not only become a teacher, he became a principal of some of the districts here in the public school system. But yeah, so we started recruiting Black teachers. You had a board for the public school system that was elected by Black people. And so you have like this functioning institution for Cincinnati's Black population, which is so essential to any community that's trying to thrive independent from the dominant culture. So like that was, so me thinking about this through the pandemic, like I'm just thinking like, oh man, like what if that still existed? Like that would be.
Yeah. How long did it exist? How long was that colored public school system here?
It was dismantled by 1873, 1874. Yeah. And there's a few reasons for that. For one of the reasons I've already pointed out, even since the establishment of the public school system, we have evidence of like disruption from the dominant culture, which is nicely saying the white people in the city of Cincinnati and statewide, to be honest. When they got back to Cincinnati, sorry about that. When they got back to Cincinnati, again, like they had no funding for the school. So you got a institution that's ready to be established. It's documented, it's legal, but you have no money for it. So what John Gaines led the way on is that he led the way in suing the city to get those funds, which were really Black citizens funds, to go into this school system so they can pay salaries, purchase property, and start to do the things that you need to do when you have a school system. So you have that like evidence of disruption from the dominant culture trying to take control of it and really trying to kick it out of the city. So that was early on, and strong. Another way that example is that there actually was a small period between the early 1850s and up until about 1856, 57. At that point, they started appointing white individuals to be on the colored public school board. So is one of the pictures that I'll share. You will actually see some white members there, and it was during that period. So we have like just at least a few examples of disruption. But what ultimately led to it was that money was a problem. Like gaining the money to run the school system was always a problem, especially for a marginalized, oppressed minority group. Yeah. And so that was another reason. And ultimately, what it came down to was that there were splinters. To be completely honest, they were splinter groups within the colored public school system itself. So you had one group that felt like, hey, we want to educate our Black children this way, and there was another group that said, no, we want to educate our Black children this way. Mm-hmm. And that aided the process too of dismantling it. But it was ultimately dismantled by 1873, and it's unfortunate. I wish that 1849 to 1874, 73. It's not that long. I mean, that's a very short-lived, essential institution. But I wish that it could have stayed around. What killed it? I'm sorry, it's in my head, but I keep forgetting to get to the point. What eventually killed it was a bill from the Ohio lawmakers that was intended to, and which it did. The bill basically said the separate public school system has to go because we're going to integrate all the schools now. Like to put it, to paraphrase it. So that bill made it possible for African Americans and any other minority group that came behind us to be able to enter the common public school system in Cincinnati, which is today, I keep saying, the Cincinnati public school system. So since you have that bill, in some people's minds, there's no longer need for a colored public school system. So it was dismantled, and all of its property, its teachers came up under the umbrella of the common public school system, CPS. So that's what ultimately killed it. That bill was either in 1873 or 74. It was called the Taft Bill, matter of fact. But yeah, that's what ultimately, dismantled it. Yeah, obviously, I wish it would have stuck around. I think there were plenty of reasons why you still needed a colored public school system. But that was the action. That was the bill that closed it down. And therefore, Black children, they were able to enter the common public school system. But again, like that, we have evidence that a lot of them were still not able to go. And a part of that Taft bill, they promised Black teachers that they would give them jobs in the common public school systems. And we have evidence that they didn't get jobs in those school systems. So it was intended to deliver, equality, equity, but it didn't. We have evidence that it didn't.
Yeah. I have to imagine, like you said, 30 years really isn't that long of a time, but while it was here, and while they were able to hire, good quality teachers and to have the school for the community, I have to imagine that some prominent Black citizens of Cincinnati probably went through that school system at the time. Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. During the period, there were more. I mean, there were. Let me quote. I'm gonna start to say something that I know a lot of people kick my butt for. But what is not debatable is that there were a lot of black teachers trained through that public school system. To be completely honest, they didn't always find jobs to do that teaching in.
Yeah.
But you had a model of just what it looks like to take a school system and train people to do a profession. So there were a lot of black teachers that came through there. But yeah, what's more is like notable is the African American leaders who were a part of that. So like John Gaines, like who kicked it off, the Peter Clark, who I mentioned before, and so we don't have unfortunately a lot of evidence of specific names of people who might have come there. If we did the hard work of digging, I probably could find some of that.
Yeah.
And I'm not assuming that there's not some other person or individuals who have taken on that work. But it is not debatable that there were a lot of teachers trained through that public school system. But yeah, like you were saying, it's only 30 years. I mean, you can't. It's hard to try to talk about impact when you have only when you have something existing for only 30 years, and the African American population didn't have complete control for those 30 years. Like they were fighting disruption. I mean, it's just like it would have been nice if they would have been able to be left alone for 30 years. But we have evidence that they were not left alone at all. But no, there were significant things done within that school system, but they could have had more time to do more.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you again for coming in and hanging out and sharing that story. I didn't know that Cincinnati had a colored public school system at one point, or that it was successful for the time period that it existed. So thank you for sharing. Any final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
No, I mean that was the story. That was it.
All right.
And I guess for people who are more so, yeah. So what the difference that a black public school system will make today, because I'm willing to bet that if it was still here, it would no longer be called colored. So it would be called the Black Public School System of Cincinnati. Some of the differences that would make, because I hinted towards that in the beginning. Number one, we would have back an essential institution that every community needs in order to live apart from the dominant culture. So I'm really talking about what minority groups in America need. We need our own independent, essential institutions. So those are things like schools, hospitals, what is that? Churches or religion, or whatever your religion is. We need to have our own. Of things like that, our own source of what do you call it? Our own source of media outlet. So radios, newspaper. We need those essential institutions. And so if the Cincinnati's black population still had that today, we would still have that essential institution. And I'm not knocking other minority groups, but if you're paying attention, we know of other minority groups in this city that have their own school system. I don't want to knock on them. I'm proud of them. They're doing the right thing. But I just think that it's kind of just a little silly that when it comes to African Americans in this city, to ask that, it's kind of like, what do you mean? You have CPS? Well, CPS is great, but it'd be nice if we had our own public school system. So what difference would that make? Number one, clear as day, the black community here will have an essential institution specifically for us. But also, if we had that institution, I kept hinting towards in the beginning, we would have the opportunity to kind of base a Afrocentric education for our black children. My experience with my son in CPS, it's a great school. He has the bomb teacher. I mean, he has some bomb teachers. That means they're really good. Many of them are African American, and that's a plus to me. I think personally he needs that. But their curriculum leans towards as it leans towards Eurocentricity. So he will bring home stories. I remember he brought home one, I think it was called Stone Fox, and it was about some little Native American, and they didn't bring up, the tension between Europeans and Native Americans. It was just a story about him and some Native American. The Native American was like, I mean, they wasn't like focusing on his narrative at all. And I'm just like, man, I don't know if that's the first time, or I don't know if that's a way that I want to inform you about Native Americans and their history, based off, a Eurocentric, fairy tale of it. So it's just stuff like that. Like, we will have a chance to center an education that starts and ends from an Afrocentric point of view. But I would love if he had that. The way it's looking, and it's kind of how it's always been. I just have the responsibility of filling in those gaps that are left unfilled by I was about to say Common Public School System, by CPS, which is fine with me. If I have to do it, so I'm gonna do it. But it would be cool if I did not have to work so hard to do that, because there will be a Black public school system like who will understand that we have a need to do that together. So yeah, I think that will make a huge difference. I've been thinking about it as a fantasy for the past 2 months. It's not gonna happen. But I just wish that it was still around. But yeah, that's my story. It's been a cool fantasy to think about.
Speaking of filling gaps, I'm sure that you've filled in some gaps for our friends watching at home tonight. I know you filled some in for me. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. And thank you to everybody who's watching at home, who joined in to hear Marq's story. And we will see you next time for Museum on Tap Happy Hour. Take care.